So today is, in fact, September 11th. There were many lessons we should have learned on September 11th and that we've busily spent the last 20 years unlearning. One of those big lessons is foreign policy actually matters. It actually has consequences. And that if you don't have a little bit of foresight, the consequences can be disastrous. Now, the foresight we did not have in the 1990s is that if we did not stop al-Qaeda in its tracks in 1998 when they bombed the embassies in Tanzania and Kenya, that would come back to haunt America as al-Qaeda grew and metastasized, and it would end with the death of 3,000 Americans on 9/11. Okay, what we're talking about right now is orders of magnitude larger. If you don't stop the Chinese government in its tracks when it comes to its aggressive instincts, we're not talking about 3,000 Americans dead, which was the worst tragedy on American soil since the Second World War. You're talking about like a full-scale conflagration with the largest physical army on planet Earth. America has the best army on planet Earth, the most technologically advanced army on planet Earth. But if you don't stop the Chinese, people bumble their way into war because of misinterpretation. They think the other side is weaker than it is. Most wars in the modern era get started exactly the way the war between Russia and Ukraine got started. Russia misinterpreted signals from the West that they wouldn't do anything if Ukraine was invaded. And they misinterpreted Ukraine's military strength, and then they invaded, and now we are in year 2 of a long war that has killed hundreds of thousands of people. Those sorts of misinterpretations are created by failures of communication. And Joe Biden cannot communicate. He is not capable of this. And meanwhile, Xi Jinping is becoming more and more aggressive. His entire strategy with regard to China is quite frightening, not because it's bound to be successful or make China stronger, but because it is bound to make China actually weaker and thus more aggressive. I've talked about this before. China has massive problems. We did a YouTube video you should check out in our series Fact, where I talk about the big problems that China has, but they include things like demographics. China is completely demographically upside down. They do not have enough young people to actually provide the labor force or the earning force to pay for all of the debt they've taken out. Speaking of which, their debt is extraordinary. If you actually take into account all of the public and private debt that they've incurred, and there's no such thing as a real private sector, everything is backed by the government over there. You are talking about a country that is up to its eyeballs in debt. And you are talking about a country that has now cut off the only mechanism for economic success that was available to it in capitalism. So at least prior regimes in China were moving more toward a sort of bizarre backdoor capitalism where Hong Kong acted as basically a way to flush money into the system. They would allow corrupt capitalism to corrupt their wonderful regime of communism just to support it. But now Xi Jinping, he's actually an ideologue, and he's like, no, we're not doing any of that. Autarky inside our own borders. Well, as China gets weaker, it's spending more on its military budget. And it's going to have to get aggressive on its foreign borders. We'll get to this in just 1 second. First, I need to talk to you about Daily Wire's most trusted privacy partner and premier sponsor of this show, ExpressVPN. Using the internet without ExpressVPN is like checking in your baggage at the airport without a lock. Well, you think your stuff is kept private, but you don't really know who's going through your belongings. It could be some weirdo in the back room who's just, sniffing all your clothes. You don't want that to happen with your luggage. You don't want it to happen with your data online either. When you go online without a VPN, internet service providers can see every single website you visit. They can legally sell that information without your consent to ad companies and tech giants who then use your data to target you. When you use ExpressVPN, ISPs cannot see your online activity. Your identity is anonymized by a secure VPN server. Your data is also encrypted for maximum protection. ExpressVPN is super easy to use. You just fire up the app, you click one button, plus it works on all devices. We're talking phones, laptops, even routers, so everyone who shares your Wi-Fi can, in fact, be protected. Secure your online activity today by visiting expressvpn.com/Ben. Do it today. Get an extra 3 months free on a 1-year package. That's expressvpn.com/Ben. expressvpn.com/Ben to learn more. Okay, so Xi Jinping is getting more and more aggressive. Article today from The Atlantic. The world's most powerful leaders gathered in New Delhi for this year's premier diplomatic event, the G20 summit. But China's Xi Jinping deemed it not worth his time. His absence sends a stark signal China is done with the established world order. Ditching the summit marks a dramatic turn in China's foreign policy. For the past several years, Xi has apparently sought to make China an alternative to the West. Now Xi is positioning his country as a full-on opponent, ready to align its own bloc against the United States, its partners, and international institutions they support. Xi's break with the establishment has been a long time coming. His predecessors integrated China into the U.S.-led global order by joining its foundational institutions like the World Bank and the WTO. For much of his tenure over the past decade, Xi has kept a foot in the door to the Western order, even as China's relations with the U.S. have deteriorated. China even participated, though grudgingly, in G20 efforts to help alleviate debt burdens on struggling low-income countries. But over the course of his rule, Xi has now grown hostile to the existing order. He's intent on altering it. His focus on developing alternative institutions Beijing could lead and control. He formed the Asian Infrastructure Investment Bank to rival the World Bank. He's promoted competing international forums like the Shanghai Cooperation Organization, whose membership includes Russia and Iran. He's going to stick around at the UN because, Obviously, he thinks he can militarize it. But the G20 is not one of the places where he is actually flexing his influence because he would like to undercut the G20. The map controversy suggests Xi's nationalist pursuit of global power could undermine his push to lead a new bloc against the West because he is ticking off, by the way, the Indians, for example. But he sees the United States as his chief global opponent. This is being highlighted over the weekend by the fact that China went on high alert after U.S. and Canadian ships went through the Taiwan Strait, according to the Agence France-Presse. China said on Saturday that its troops were on constant high alert after two ships belonging to the U.S. and Canada transited through the Taiwan Strait, according to a military spokesperson. This, by the way, is one reason why the United States cutting back its military budget, particularly on the Navy, is idiotic in the extreme. It is true the United States has the world's most powerful Navy by a long shot. It is also true that the United States requires the world's most powerful Navy because many of the shipping lanes that are easy choke points for our enemies are very, very far away from us. China doesn't require a deep water Navy in order to challenge the United States. All they require is what they call a gray water Navy in order to ensure that they can basically control the Taiwan Strait. The Taiwan Strait is right in their backyard. It is not in our backyard, obviously. And so this is a problem for us. So you'd imagine that strong American leadership would be something worthwhile. Well, meanwhile, Joe Biden, he's out there saying things like, I don't want to contain China. I don't want to contain, well, why not? Seriously, why not? Why would you not want to contain China? I understand that we're sort of pussyfooting around this whole issue with China, but the reality is that Xi is not. And taking a more aggressive posture toward China, saying, listen, the way that your regime is currently attacking the rest of the world with its soft power and sometimes with hard power is not acceptable to the United States. We're going to build up our military, and we are not going to allow you to use your expansionism to threaten American interests, which do include places like Taiwan. Here, now, what's weird about Biden is that he's taking this completely confused approach. So from time to time, he will say things like, if Taiwan is attacked, America will defend, which, as I've said before, is actually not a terrible thing to say. I think it's actually the right thing to say, but it would require an actual dedication to a military budget capable of supporting that kind of brash talk. Biden's talk on foreign policy is generally empty words, followed by very little else. And this creates very sticky situations, as we'll see when it comes to Ukraine in a second. Here is Joe Biden saying he doesn't want to contain China.
It was less about containing China. I don't want to contain China. I just want to make sure we have a relationship with China that is on the up and up, squared away. Everybody knows what it's all about.
Okay, so, I mean, all of that, he doesn't want to contain China. That I don't know what he thinks he means by that. I really don't. So he was in Vietnam specifically to contain China. We should note here. Right? That's why he's there. Biden said at a news conference, today we can trace a 50-year arc of progress in the relationship between our nations from conflict to normalization. He was talking to the General Secretary of the Communist Party in Vietnam. He says this is a new elevated status that will be a force for prosperity and security in one of the most consequential regions in the world. There's only one problem, of course, which is that Vietnam is also aligned with the Russians. Literally over the weekend, Vietnam is chasing a secret Russian arms deal even as it deepens American ties. In order for America to have a big umbrella, America has to have a very strong umbrella. That strong umbrella has to include things like making sure that if we think that Vietnam is actually going to be weaponized against China, it doesn't buy its weapons from the Russians, who are allies of the Chinese. All this would be a lot less complicated if the United States actually took a muscular approach to the world. But Joe Biden doesn't have a muscular approach to the world. He says he does, but then he doesn't fill in the gaps. Are you tired of the lies and the twists of the mainstream media talking points? Yeah, me too. Join me in my newest series, Fact, where I dismantle and bring truth to this tiring mainstream agenda.